My name is Sophie, 29 years old, and I'm holding my ex-husband's wedding invitation right now. 3 years ago, I was sitting in a prison cell for something I never did, causing his mistress's miscarriage. Now Marcus wants to marry that same woman, and he actually had the nerve to send me an invitation. What he doesn't know is that I've been preparing for this moment every single day since my release. Before we begin this story, please let me know where you're watching from. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted with your life, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice served cold. I was a pediatric nurse in Boston when I first met Marcus at a medical conference downtown. He was everything a girl could dream of: a successful surgeon with gentle hands and a smile that could light up an entire operating room. His confidence drew me in immediately, the way he commanded attention when discussing new surgical techniques, how other doctors hung on his every word. Coming from a middle-class family myself, I was mesmerized by his world of charity galas and country club memberships. Our romance moved fast, maybe too fast looking back now. 6 months of whirlwind dates to the finest restaurants in Back Bay, surprise weekend trips to Nantucket, and then came the proposal at Fenway Park. He arranged for my name on the scoreboard during the 7th inning stretch, dropped to one knee right there in front of 30,000 people. How could I say anything but yes when the entire stadium was cheering for us? The wedding happened just 4 months later at Martha's Vineyard. 200 guests watched us exchange vows under a gazebo decorated with white roses and baby's breath. Marcus's mother, Patricia, had insisted on planning everything from the 7-course menu to the string quartet that played during cocktail hour. I should have noticed then how she barely smiled in any of the photos, how her congratulations felt more like condolences. Those first 2 years felt like living in a dream. We bought a gorgeous brownstone in Beacon Hill, with original hardwood floors and a view of the Charles River. I threw myself into being the perfect surgeon's wife, hosting dinner parties for the hospital board members, organizing fundraisers for the cardiac wing where Marcus worked. Every morning I'd wake up early to prepare his breakfast iron, his scrubs just the way he liked them, and send him off with a kiss and homemade lunch. I supported his career completely, even when it meant sacrificing my own advancement opportunities. When the head nurse position opened up in pediatrics, I didn't apply because Marcus said the extra hours would interfere with his conference schedule, where he needed me by his side. I smiled and agreed, telling myself that supporting my husband was more important than any promotion. The red flags started small, so small, I convinced myself I was imagining things. Late-night emergency surgeries became more frequent, but when I'd check with my friend Emma, who worked scheduling, she'd tell me Marcus wasn't on the emergency roster. Mysterious charges appeared on our credit cards for restaurants I'd never been to, always during his supposed conference calls. His phone, which used to lay carelessly on the counter, suddenly required a passcode. Then there was Patricia, Marcus's mother, who never quite warmed to me despite my best efforts. She'd make comments about my background, how I didn't understand their social circle's expectations. During family dinners, she'd reminisce about Marcus's ex-girlfriends from Harvard women, who went on to become federal judges or Fortune 500 executives. I was just a nurse from a working-class Boston neighborhood, clearly not what she'd envisioned for her golden boy. Our fertility struggles made everything worse. Month after month, I'd stare at negative pregnancy tests while Patricia not so subtly asked when she'd become a grandmother. Marcus seemed almost relieved each time I told him we weren't pregnant, claiming we had plenty of time, that his career needed to be more established first. I started tracking my ovulation religiously, taking vitamins, even trying acupuncture, but nothing worked. Everything changed when Cassandra joined the hospital. She was the new anesthesiologist, fresh from her residency at Johns Hopkins. Patricia introduced her at the annual hospital fundraiser, beaming as she mentioned Cassandra was the daughter of her Wellesley roommate. 32-year-old blonde with the kind of porcelain skin that never needed foundation, and a laugh that turned every man's head in the room. The first time I met her, she was standing too close to Marcus at the bar, her hand resting on his forearm as she threw her head back, laughing at something he'd said. When I approached, she didn't step away. Instead, she pulled me into a hug like we were old friends, gushing about how lucky I was to have snagged Boston's most eligible surgeon. The way she said it, the the way her eyes lingered on him made my stomach turn. Marcus brushed off my concerns that night, saying I was being paranoid, that Cassandra was just friendly. She was new to the city, didn't know anyone needed friends. When she started showing up at our dinner parties uninvited, he said she was lonely. When she began texting him late at night about cases, he said she valued his mentorship. I wanted so desperately to be the cool, understanding wife that I swallowed my doubts and smiled whenever she appeared at our door with another bottle of wine and another excuse to stay late. The situation with Cassandra escalated slowly, like watching storm clouds gather on the horizon. She began appearing everywhere we went, at our favorite Sunday brunch spot in Cambridge, at the gym, where Marcus played racquetball, even at my book club meeting. Claiming Emma had invited her, though, Emma later swore she hadn't. Each time she'd act surprised to see us, as if Boston wasn't a city of 600,000 people, where coincidences like this didn't just happen 3 times a week. Marcus's defense of her became more aggressive. When I pointed out how inappropriate it was for her to call him at midnight about a patient they both knew was stable, he accused me of being jealous and insecure. When I found a receipt for a $300 dinner at L'Espalier, on a night he claimed to be in emergency surgery, he said it was a department meeting he'd forgotten to mention. The gold bracelet charge from Tiffany's that appeared on our credit card statement was supposedly a gift for his secretary's retirement, though I'd met his secretary and she was barely 40. Emma tried to warn me about the hospital rumors. She'd pull me aside during my shifts, speaking in hushed tones about seeing Marcus and Cassandra leaving the on-call room together, about their long lunches that stretched well past the hour mark. Other nurses would suddenly stop talking when I entered the break room, their pitying looks following me down the hallways. I felt like the last person to know what everyone else could clearly see. The night I finally had proof was a Thursday in March. Marcus had said he was attending a surgical symposium downtown, but when I called the hotel to surprise him with room service, they had no record of any medical symposium. My hands shook as I drove to Cassandra's apartment building in the South End, parallel parking across the street, with a clear view of her entrance. I waited 3 hours watching Netflix on my phone to distract myself from what I was doing, from what I'd become. At 10:30, Marcus's BMW pulled up. He stepped out wearing the same suit he'd left in that morning, carrying a bottle of wine I recognized from our special occasion collection in the basement. He had his own key to her building, didn't even need to buzz up. I sat there for another hour taking photos with my phone, documenting the betrayal my heart already knew was true. When he came home after midnight, I was sitting in the dark living room with the photos displayed on my iPad. He didn't even try to deny it at first, just stood there in the doorway like a caught teenager. Then came the gaslighting, the claims that I was overreacting, that they were just friends working on a complicated case together. When I showed him the credit card statements, the receipts, Emma's testimony about the rumors, he finally broke down. The affair had been going on for 8 months. 8 months of lies, of me cooking his favorite meals while he was tasting her lips. 8 months of me lying alone in our bed, wondering what was wrong with me while he was wrapped in her sheets. He swore it meant nothing, that it was just physical, just a mistake that had gotten out of hand. He promised to end it immediately, to request her transfer to another hospital, to go to couples therapy, anything to save our marriage. I might have considered it, might have been weak enough to try, until Patricia called. She didn't even pretend to be sympathetic, just launched into a lecture about how men had needs, how I should have been more attentive, more understanding of the pressure Marcus was under. She actually suggested I should be grateful he was discreet about it, that at least he wasn't embarrassing me publicly. That's when I knew this wasn't just Marcus's betrayal, but his entire family's dismissal of my worth. I packed my bags that night while Marcus was at work, taking only my clothes and personal items, leaving behind every gift he'd ever given me. Emma had already prepared her guest room, had even stocked the refrigerator with my favorite ice cream and wine. We stayed up until dawn, her holding me while I sobbed out 5 years of love and 2 years of marriage, grieving not just what I'd lost, but what I'd never actually had. The next morning, Cassandra made an announcement at the hospital staff meeting. She was 3 months pregnant. The timeline meant she'd gotten pregnant right around Christmas, when Marcus and I had been trying so desperately for our own child. The entire room turned to look at me, waiting for my reaction, but I wasn't there. I was at a lawyer's office filing for divorce, trying to salvage what was left of my dignity. Marcus called me 17 times that day. When I finally answered, his panic was palpable through the phone. He admitted everything: the affair, the pregnancy, the fact that Cassandra was threatening to go public if he didn't leave me. But he swore he loved me, that we could work through this, that he'd convince her to terminate the pregnancy or raise the child alone. The desperation in his voice might have moved me once, but all I felt was disgust. I hired a private investigator with my savings, determined to protect myself in the divorce proceedings. What he found was a pattern of behavior hotels charged to Marcus's personal card jewelry purchases, going back almost to when Cassandra first arrived, even a weekend trip to Martha's Vineyard, when he told me he was at a conference in Philadelphia. The investigator also discovered something interesting about Cassandra's past: a similar situation at her previous hospital in Baltimore, though the details were sealed in a confidentiality agreement. Patricia showed up at Emma's apartment the next week, not to apologize, but to negotiate. She offered me $50,000 to sign the divorce papers quickly, to walk away without asking for alimony or any portion of Marcus's assets. She stood in Emma's tiny living room in her St. John's suit, looking at the surroundings with barely concealed disgust, and told me I should be grateful for the offer. I told her to leave before I called the police. 2 weeks after I'd left Marcus, he called asking me to come to our house to discuss the divorce settlement. He said his lawyer had drawn up papers that would be generous, that we could end this cleanly without dragging it through court. Against Emma's advice, I agreed to meet him, wanting to get closure, to look him in the eye one last time in the home we'd shared. When I arrived at 2 in the afternoon, Marcus's car wasn't in the driveway. I used my key to let myself in, calling out his name in the empty house. Instead, I found Cassandra sitting in my living room in my favorite chair, sipping tea from my grandmother's china. She was wearing one of Marcus's shirts, her hand resting on her still flat stomach, a diamond ring on her finger that made my engagement ring look like costume jewelry. She didn't stand when I entered, just smiled, and gestured for me to sit like she was the lady of the house, and I was an unwelcome guest. Her voice was honey sweet, as she explained that Marcus wasn't coming, that he'd never planned to come. This was her idea, her chance to make things clear between us. Marcus was hers now, had always been hers from the moment she'd decided she wanted him. I was just an inconvenient obstacle that needed to be removed. The things she told me then, the intimate details about their relationship, were designed to hurt. She described birthmarks on Marcus's body. I thought only I knew about, mentioned the way he called her name in his sleep, how he'd told her things about our marriage, our intimacy, that no husband should ever share. She knew about my fertility struggles, and laughed, suggesting maybe my body had known Marcus wasn't meant to be the father of my children. I stood to leave, unable to listen to another word, but she moved faster than I expected for a pregnant woman. She blocked my path to the door, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my arm as she grabbed me. Her face transformed from beautiful to vicious as she hissed that I needed to sign the divorce papers, needed to disappear from Boston, from Marcus's life, from any place where their perfect family might have to acknowledge I ever existed. I wrenched my arm free and pushed past her, not hard, just enough to get to the door. But Cassandra was already planning her next move. As I reached for the doorknob, I heard her stumble behind me, a calculated fall that sent her tumbling down the 3 steps that led from the living room to the foyer. She landed at the bottom with a scream that could have won her an Oscar, clutching her stomach and crying out for her baby. The timing of Marcus's arrival was too perfect to be coincidental. He burst through the door not 30 seconds later, finding Cassandra on the floor and me standing frozen at the top of the steps. The horror in his eyes when he looked at me, the immediate assumption of my guilt, told me everything I needed to know about where his loyalties lay. He dropped to his knees beside her, cradling her head, screaming at me to call an ambulance while calling me a monster. The ambulance arrived within minutes, followed closely by the police. Cassandra's performance in the back of that ambulance was flawless, tears streaming down her face as she described how I'd attacked her, pushed her, deliberately screaming about how if I couldn't have Marcus's baby, then neither could she. The paramedics exchanged glances as they worked on her, and I saw my fate being sealed in their sympathetic looks toward her and suspicious glares at me. At the hospital, the news came quickly. Cassandra had lost the baby. The medical staff, many of whom knew all three of us, could barely look at me. Marcus stood in that hospital corridor, still in his scrubs from work, and told the police I'd been unstable since discovering the affair, that I'd made threats, that he'd been worried about Cassandra's safety, but never imagined I'd actually hurt her. Each word was another nail in my coffin. The police found text messages on my phone I'd never sent, threats against Cassandra that had somehow been typed and delivered from my number while I was sleeping at Emma's apartment. They found emails from my account to Marcus describing violent fantasies I'd never had, words I'd never written. Someone had been planning this for weeks, creating a digital trail of obsession and rage that painted me as a woman scorned and dangerous. Emma tried to provide an alibi for some of the threatening messages, swearing I'd been with her, but the prosecutors dismissed her as a loyal friend lying to protect me. The private investigator I'd hired had mysteriously lost all his files on Marcus and Cassandra, claiming a break-in at his office that the police couldn't verify. Every avenue of defense I thought I had crumbled like sandcastles against the tide. The arrest happened at Emma's apartment. Two officers knocked politely, almost apologetically, as if they knew something wasn't right but had no choice but to follow the evidence. They read me my rights as Emma sobbed, promising to call every lawyer she knew. The handcuffs were cold against my wrists. The back of the police car smelled like disinfectant and despair. As we drove away, I saw curtains twitching in windows, neighbors witnessing my humiliation. Bail was set at $200,000, an impossible sum. The prosecutor, a friend of Patricia's from the country club, argued I was a flight risk and a danger to society. My public defender was fresh out of law school, overwhelmed with cases, and spent maybe 30 minutes reviewing my file before the hearing. He suggested I take a plea deal, admit to involuntary manslaughter, serve maybe 18 months. I refused, insisting on my innocence, and he sighed, like I was just another delusional client. During the weeks leading to trial, I learned about the depth of Marcus's connections. The judge assigned to my case was Marcus's golfing buddy. The prosecutor's daughter was a surgical resident under Marcus's mentorship. Even some of the potential jury members were patients at the hospital, where Marcus was considered a hero for saving lives. The system I'd always believed in, always trusted to protect the innocent, was showing me its true face, and that face belonged to whoever had the most money and influence. The trial was a masterclass in manipulation. Cassandra took the stand in a black dress that highlighted her grief, a tissue constantly pressed to her eyes, though I never saw actual tears. She described our confrontation with embellishments that grew more dramatic with each telling. In her version, I'd threatened to kill her baby, had grabbed her violently, thrown her down those stairs with murderous intent. The prosecutor held up enlarged printouts of the fake threatening messages, each one making me look more unhinged than the last. Marcus's testimony was the betrayal that cut deepest. He sat in that witness box, avoiding my eyes, and painted a picture of a wife who'd become increasingly unstable over our fertility issues. He claimed I'd been violent before, though he'd never reported it out of love and concern for my mental health. He described finding bruises on his arms, scratches on his back, all self-inflicted or from our intimate moments, but now twisted into evidence of my dangerous nature. When asked if he believed I was capable of hurting Cassandra, he paused dramatically and then whispered yes. The witnesses they brought forward were people I'd never seen before, claiming to be hospital staff who'd overheard me threatening Cassandra in the cafeteria, in the parking garage, in places I hadn't been since leaving Marcus. One woman swore she'd seen me following Cassandra home multiple times. Another claimed I'd keyed her car. The security footage that could have disproved these claims had mysteriously been deleted due to a system update. My character witnesses were blocked at every turn. The judge ruled that testimony about my work as a pediatric nurse was irrelevant. My history of caring for children, of saving lives, of being gentle and compassionate, none of it mattered. Emma was painted as an unreliable witness, bitter about her own divorce, projecting her anger onto Marcus. Even my parents, who'd flown up from Florida, were limited to just confirming I'd been a good daughter, nothing more. The verdict came back in less than 2 hours. Guilty of assault resulting in miscarriage. The judge sentenced me to 18 months in minimum security prison, claiming he was being lenient given my previous clean record. As the bailiff led me away, I saw Patricia in the gallery, a small smile playing on her lips. Marcus had already left, probably unable to face what he'd done. Cassandra was nowhere to be seen, already moving on to the next phase of her plan. Those first days in prison were a nightmare I couldn't wake from. The intake process stripped away not just my clothes, but my identity, reducing me to a numbers statistic, another woman who'd allegedly let jealousy drive her to violence. The other inmates looked at me with a mixture of contempt and pity. "Baby killer," they whispered, though some who'd been through the system longer recognized the hallmarks of a frame job. My cellmate Maria became an unexpected lifeline. A 45-year-old accountant doing 3 years for embezzlement, she had kind eyes and a sharp mind that saw through bullshit immediately. After I told her my story, she nodded slowly and said she'd seen it before, wealthy men destroying inconvenient wives, using the system as their weapon. She took me under her wing, teaching me how to survive, how to keep my head down while keeping my spirit intact. The prison library became my sanctuary. I spent every free hour there reading law books, studying cases similar to mine, understanding how the system had failed me, and how I might someday fight back. The elderly librarian Mrs. Peterson had been a paralegal before retirement and helped me understand legal terminology, procedure, precedent. She never asked if I was guilty, just helped me learn. Letters from the outside world were my only connection to reality. Emma wrote every week telling me about life at the hospital, how Marcus and Cassandra were living in our house now, redecorating everything I'd chosen with care. My parents wrote confused, heartbroken letters, unable to understand how their daughter had ended up in prison, but promising they still loved me, still believed in me, even if they didn't understand what had happened. 6 months into my sentence, Marcus served me with divorce papers. He was seeking everything: the house, our savings, even items that had been mine before marriage, claiming mental cruelty and criminal behavior. The papers were delivered by Patricia's personal lawyer, who smirked as I signed the receipt. I had no money for a lawyer, no way to fight back from behind bars. My public defender had long since moved on to other cases. Patricia started visiting me monthly, not out of concern, but to twist the knife deeper. She'd sit across from me in the visiting room, updating me on Marcus and Cassandra's happiness, their plans to marry. As soon as the divorce was final, the new car he'd bought her, the European vacation they were planning. She always ended with an offer: sign away any claim to Marcus's assets, and she'd put money in my commissary account. I always refused, and she'd leave with predictions about how I'd end up homeless, worthless, forgotten. Maria's cousin, a paralegal named Tony, started reviewing my trial transcripts as a favor. What he found were irregularities that even a first-year law student should have caught. The chain of custody for the threatening messages was broken. The metadata showed anomalies suggesting tampering. Several of the witnesses who testified against me had criminal records that were never disclosed. Most interesting, Cassandra's medical records from the miscarriage were sealed, requiring a court order to access. Through Emma's investigation on the outside and Tony's legal knowledge, we started piecing together the truth. Cassandra had never been pregnant at all. The medical records, when finally accessed through a sympathetic nurse who risked her job, showed she'd been prescribed abortion medication 2 weeks before the fall medication typically used to manage an already failed pregnancy. The entire scenario had been orchestrated from the beginning. The deeper we dug, the more we discovered about Marcus's hidden life. He had a gambling problem, owing almost $500,000 to some very dangerous people. He needed my grandmother's trust fund, which I would inherit when I turned 30, just 8 months away. With me in prison and divorced, he thought he could claim it as marital property through some complex legal maneuvering Patricia's lawyers had devised. But there was more about Cassandra, too. This wasn't her first time running this con. Tony found sealed records from California and Maryland, similar situations where she'd targeted married doctors, claimed pregnancy, then extorted money for silence. She was a professional predator who'd found her biggest mark yet in Marcus, or so she thought. What she didn't know was that Marcus was playing his own game, planning to use her to get rid of me, then discard her once he had my inheritance. I was released after 11 months for good behavior, walking out of prison with a garbage bag of belongings and a criminal record that would follow me forever. Emma picked me up, tears streaming down both our faces as we embraced in the parking lot. The world looked different after nearly a year behind bars, sharper somehow, like I was seeing it clearly for the first time. Everything I'd built in my life was gone. Marcus had made sure of that. The house I'd loved was now theirs, redecorated in Cassandra's gaudy taste, according to Emma. My nursing license was suspended pending review, which meant indefinitely since Marcus had connections on the board. Our joint savings account had been emptied legally since his name was on it too. Even my car had been sold, Marcus claiming he needed the money for legal fees from the divorce. I had nothing left but my determination and the truth that only a few people believed. Finding work with a criminal record proved nearly impossible. Every background check ended the same way, with apologetic rejections or suddenly filled positions. Finally, a diner in Southie took a chance on me, the owner being an ex-convict himself who believed in second chances. The work was humiliating for someone who'd once saved children's lives, but it was honest money and I was grateful for it. I served coffee and eggs to construction workers and college students, keeping my head down and rebuilding from zero. 3 weeks after my release, Marcus walked into the diner with Cassandra. The shock on his face when he saw me behind the counter was almost worth the humiliation. Cassandra, however, seemed delighted, like seeing me reduced to waitressing was the cherry on top of her victory sundae. She ordered the most expensive items on the menu, sending food back twice for imaginary problems, leaving no tip on a $100 bill. I served them with a smile, refused to let them see they'd affected me. Marcus returned alone the next morning, sliding into a booth in my section just as the breakfast rush ended. He looked terrible, up-close bags under his eyes, the smell of whiskey clinging to him at 9 a.m. He tried small talk at first, asking how I was doing, mentioning the weather, acting like we were old acquaintances, instead of former spouses where one had destroyed the other's life. When I just stared at him silently, he finally got to his point. He pulled out an envelope thick with cash, sliding it across the table like we were making a drug deal. $20,000, he said, enough to start over somewhere far from Boston. All I had to do was leave tonight, never contact him or Cassandra again, never speak about what happened. He tried to frame it as concern for my well-being, saying staying in Boston would only hurt me more, that everyone knew what I'd done and I'd never escape it here. I counted the money, slowly making him sweat, then slid it back across the table untouched. I leaned in close enough to smell his expensive cologne mixed with fear sweat and told him I was exactly where I needed to be. The look of panic that crossed his face was the first moment of satisfaction I'd felt in over a year. He tried to argue, to threaten, to plead, but I just walked away, returning with his check for the coffee he hadn't touched. He left the money on the table, and I turned it in to my manager, saying a customer had forgotten it. From that day forward, I started documenting everything. Every time Marcus or Cassandra appeared, I recorded it on my phone. Every threatening text from blocked numbers, every dead flower left on Emma's doorstep where I was staying, every instance of harassment went into a file I was building. Tony had taught me about admissible evidence during his prison visits, and I was going to do this right. James, a private investigator whom Marcus had destroyed years earlier in a malpractice case, reached out to me through Emma. He'd been waiting for a chance to return the favor and offered his services pro bono. Together, we started building a network of people Marcus and Patricia had wronged over the years. Nurses fired for questioning Marcus's methods, patients who'd suffered from his negligence, but been silenced with settlements, business partners Patricia had cheated. The breakthrough came when James tracked down a nurse named Kelly who'd worked at Cassandra's previous hospital in Baltimore. She was scared, bound by a non-disclosure agreement, but willing to talk off the record. Cassandra had run the same scam there, faking a pregnancy with a married surgeon, but that time she'd been caught on security footage taking abortion pills in the bathroom. The hospital had paid her to leave quietly to avoid scandal. We also found Derek, a young orthopedic surgeon who'd just joined Marcus's hospital. Cassandra had already set her sights on him, despite still living with Marcus. She was playing the same game the friendly colleague who needed mentoring the lonely woman new to the city. I wanted to warn him, sent an anonymous note with evidence of her past, but he ignored it, probably thinking it was jealous gossip. Marcus's world started crumbling without my direct involvement. His gambling debts had grown larger, the interest compounding while he waited for my inheritance that he'd never actually be able to touch. The men he owed weren't patient people, and they started showing up at the hospital at Patricia's country club, making their presence known. His surgical performance suffered from stress and drinking, leading to a botched operation that the hospital couldn't cover up. By now, Cassandra had realized Marcus was broke, that the wealthy surgeon she'd targeted was drowning in debt. The jewelry stopped coming, the trips were canceled, and she was stuck living in a house he could barely afford to keep. Their fights became legendary, and the neighborhood police called multiple times for domestic disturbances. She started spending more time with Derek, less concerned about hiding it. The 3 years following my release became a careful dance of rejection and preparation. Year 1 started when Marcus tried to reconcile showing up at the diner during my shifts, sending flowers. I'd refuse leaving voicemails about how Cassandra was bleeding him dry with her spending. He'd realized too late that she was a parasite who'd found a host already weakened by his own greed. The prenup Patricia had insisted on protected his family money, but everything he'd earned was fair game, and Cassandra was taking it all. I never responded to his attempts at contact, not once. When he'd corner me at work, I'd call my manager. When he'd wait by Emma's apartment, I'd phone the police. Each incident was documented, recorded, added to my growing file. The restraining order I eventually got was just paper, but it was legal proof of his harassment, evidence that the man who'd painted me as dangerous was actually the threat. During this time, I'd started working as a paralegal at a law firm specializing in wrongful convictions. The senior partner, Mr. Rodriguez, had taken an interest in my case after Tony brought it to his attention. He hired me initially as a filing clerk, but as he saw my dedication, my intelligence, my understanding of the law I'd taught myself in prison, he promoted me. I was good at finding the small details others missed, probably because I'd lived through how those details could destroy someone. The firm gave me access to legal resources I couldn't have afforded otherwise. I spent nights and weekends building my case for appeal, learning about prosecutorial misconduct, evidence tampering, witness coaching. Mr. Rodriguez couldn't officially represent me conflict of interest with another case, but he guided me, teaching me how to file motions, how to request evidence reviews, how to work the system that had worked against me. Patricia tried to buy me off again at the end of year 1, this time offering $100,000. She showed up at the law firm, causing a scene in the lobby, declaring loudly that I was a criminal who deceived my employers. Security removed her, but not before everyone heard her offer, heard her desperation to make me disappear. Mr. Rodriguez simply smiled and said it sounded like someone was scared of something. Year 2 brought Marcus's complete professional destruction. The hospital suspended him after he showed up drunk for surgery, his hands shaking so badly he couldn't hold a scalpel. The malpractice suits started piling up, patients coming forward about surgeries that had gone wrong over the past 3 years, complications that had been covered up or blamed on other factors. His medical license was under review, and without Patricia's money to pay for good lawyers, he was using public defenders who didn't care about saving his career. Cassandra had moved on to Derek completely by then, though she still lived in Marcus's house, still demanded he pay for everything while openly dating another man. She'd post photos on social media of her and Derek at restaurants on vacation in the Bahamas, wearing jewelry Derek bought her, all while Marcus drank himself into oblivion in the house he couldn't afford to keep, but couldn't afford to leave. The most satisfying rejection came when Marcus showed up at the law firm drunk and disheveled, begging me to take him back. He created such a disturbance that security had to physically remove him while the entire office watched. He screamed about loving me, about making a mistake, about Cassandra ruining his life, about his mother abandoning him. Everyone saw him for what he was, a pathetic man who destroyed his own life and wanted his victim to save him. I also started meeting with a journalist named Sarah, who specialized in investigative pieces about judicial corruption. She'd been following cases like mine for years, documenting how wealthy, connected people use the system to destroy their partners. My case was particularly interesting because of the medical evidence that Cassandra had never been pregnant, the digital trail proving the messages were fabricated, and the connections between Marcus's family and everyone involved in my conviction. By year 3, everything was falling apart for them. Cassandra announced her engagement to Derek and her pregnancy with his child, a real pregnancy this time. She served Marcus with eviction papers from his own house claiming domestic violence and getting a restraining order that forced him to leave immediately. She'd played him exactly as she'd planned, taking everything and moving on to her next victim. Marcus's complete breakdown was public and spectacular. He showed up at Cassandra and Derek's wedding reception drunk and belligerent, screaming about her being a con artist, about her faking the pregnancy that sent me to prison. Security dragged him out, but not before several guests recorded his rants on their phones. The videos went viral in our medical community, everyone seeing the respected surgeon reduced to a raving lunatic. Patricia cut him off completely after that, ashamed of what he'd become, worried about how his behavior reflected on her social standing. She put out statements distancing herself from him, claiming he'd been troubled since childhood, that she'd done her best, but some people couldn't be helped. The same woman who'd stood by him when he destroyed me now abandoned him when he had nothing left to offer. The district attorney's office finally agreed to review my case after Sarah's article was published in the Globe. The headline, "Framed and Imprisoned: How Boston's Elite Destroyed an Innocent Woman," included interviews with Kelly about Cassandra's history testimony, from the nurse who'd leaked the medical records showing Cassandra was never pregnant, and a digital forensics expert who proved the threatening messages were fabricated. The judge who overturned my conviction apologized for the miscarriage of justice, acknowledging the prosecutorial misconduct, the fabricated evidence, the failure of the system to protect an innocent woman. My record was expunged, my nursing license reinstated, and the door opened for civil suits against everyone involved in framing me. The investigation that followed my exoneration was thorough and devastating for those who'd wronged me. Cassandra was arrested at the hospital where she still worked, led out in handcuffs in front of the same colleagues who'd once admired her. She was charged with fraud, conspiracy, perjury, and false imprisonment. Her bail was set at $500,000, which Derek refused to pay, having finally understood what she really was. Marcus's arrest happened at the homeless shelter where he'd been staying since losing everything. The mighty surgeon who'd once performed miracles in the operating room was now charged with perjury, conspiracy to commit fraud, and false imprisonment. The police almost felt sorry for him, this broken shell of a man who reeked of cheap whiskey and defeat, but I felt nothing but justice being served. The trial was everything mine should have been: fair, thorough, and based on actual evidence. Cassandra tried to play victim again, but her history of running the same con in multiple states destroyed her credibility. The testimony from her previous victims, the medical records proving she'd never been pregnant, the digital evidence showing she'd planted those threatening messages on my phone, it all painted a picture of a calculating predator who'd finally been caught. Marcus's testimony was pathetic. He tried to claim Cassandra had manipulated him, that he'd believed her lies about the pregnancy, about me pushing her. But the prosecutors had evidence of their planning text messages between them, discussing how to get rid of me, how to access my inheritance, how to make the frame-up believable. He broke down on the stand, sobbing about losing everything, but no one in that courtroom felt sympathy for him. The civil lawsuit I filed resulted in a $3 million judgment against Marcus, Patricia, and Cassandra. Patricia's estate was forced to liquidate assets to pay her portion. The house in Beacon Hill, that had once been mine, was sold, the proceeds going toward my settlement. Every piece of jewelry Marcus had bought Cassandra was seized and auctioned. I donated half the money to a legal fund for wrongfully convicted women and used the rest to start rebuilding my life properly. My nursing license reinstatement came with offers from multiple hospitals, all wanting to distance themselves from the scandal by showing support for me. But I chose a different path. With the settlement money and a business loan, I opened a clinic specifically for women who'd been wrongfully convicted, providing medical care, psychological support, and legal referrals. It was my way of turning my pain into purpose. Emma became my business partner, leaving her hospital job to co-run the clinic. We hired other healthcare providers who understood trauma, who could treat not just physical ailments, but the deep psychological wounds that came from being betrayed by the system meant to protect us. Within 6 months, we were serving dozens of women, each with their own story of injustice and survival. The work brought me into contact with Thomas, a defense attorney who specialized in overturning wrongful convictions. He came to the clinic to meet clients staying late to discuss cases, eventually staying late just to talk with me. He was nothing like Marcus quiet, where Marcus had been loud, humble, where Marcus had been arrogant, genuine, where Marcus had been performative. He'd read every document from my case, understood the depth of what I'd endured, and never once asked why I hadn't seen it coming. Our relationship developed, slowly built on mutual respect and shared purpose rather than whirlwind romance. Thomas understood my trust issues, never pushing, always patient. He brought me coffee during long clinic days, attended court hearings for our clients, and celebrated every small victory in their fights for justice. When he finally asked me to dinner after a year of friendship, I surprised myself by saying yes. Marcus's fate was sealed when his medical license was permanently revoked following the criminal conviction. 2 years in minimum security prison, the same type of facility where I'd served my time, though he wouldn't have Maria or anyone else to protect him. I heard through the legal grapevine that he was assigned to kitchen duty, serving meals to other inmates, experiencing his own fall from grace. His mother never visited him, too ashamed and too busy protecting what was left of her social standing. Cassandra received a 5-year sentence, her multiple fraud schemes across state lines making her a federal case. Derek had divorced her while she was in county jail awaiting trial, taking full custody of their child. She lost everything she'd schemed for, ending up exactly where she'd tried to put me, but with one difference: she was actually guilty. The other women she'd conned showed up at her sentencing, finally seeing justice for what she'd done to them. Patricia's social destruction was complete. The country club revoked her membership after the scandal became public. Her charity boards asked her to resign. The society women she'd lorded over for decades now crossed the street to avoid her. She sold the family estate and moved to a small apartment in Florida, far from the Boston elite who'd once bowed to her influence. The woman who'd tried to destroy me for not being good enough for her son died alone and forgotten 2 years later. My parents finally understood the full truth when they attended the trial. They'd been confused and heartbroken during my imprisonment, wanting to believe me, but unable to reconcile the daughter they knew with what the authorities had claimed. Seeing the evidence laid out, hearing how I'd been framed, they wept with rage at what had been done to me. Our relationship, strained by distance and doubt, healed as they became vocal advocates for criminal justice reform. 1 year after opening the clinic, we'd helped 43 women navigate the legal system to overturn wrongful convictions or get early releases. Each success story fueled my determination to continue. Thomas and I had become partners in every sense, working together on cases, building a life based on justice and truth rather than appearances and lies. When he proposed, it was simple and private, just us in the clinic after hours, surrounded by the files of women we'd helped find freedom. The wedding was small, just 20 people in Emma's backyard, a world away from the spectacle at Martha's Vineyard years earlier. I wore a simple dress I'd bought myself, no designer label, no need to impress anyone. Thomas's vows included a promise to always believe me, to always stand by me, to never let the system we both knew was flawed hurt me again. Emma, my maid of honor and best friend who'd never doubted me, cried harder than anyone. 3 months after the wedding, I received one final letter from Marcus, forwarded through his lawyer. He wanted me to know he was sorry that he'd destroyed the best thing in his life, that he thought about me every day in his cell. He asked for forgiveness, not for his sake, but so I could find peace. I read it once, then burned it in the same fireplace where we'd once made plans for our future. His words meant nothing anymore. Looking back now, I see how that wedding invitation, the one Marcus and Cassandra had sent to taunt me, was actually the greatest gift they could have given me. It reminded me of how far I'd come, from prisoner to advocate, from victim to survivor, from destroyed to rebuilt stronger. Every woman who walks into our clinic sees what's possible when you refuse to let injustice break you, when you turn your pain into power. The truth about justice is that it rarely comes quickly or cleanly. It requires patient strategy and the willingness to play a longer game than those who wronged you. For 3 years, I rejected Marcus not out of spite, but out of self-preservation and determination. Every time he tried to pull me back into his chaos, I chose my own path forward. Every rejection was a small victory, a brick in the foundation of my new life. To anyone reading this, who's been wrongfully accused, who's lost everything to someone else's lies, know that your truth will eventually surface if you're patient and persistent. Document everything, build your support network, and never stop fighting for your vindication. The same system that failed you can be used to restore you, but only if you refuse to be broken by it. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destroying those who hurt you, but building something beautiful from the ashes they left behind. If you've been through something similar, I want you to know you're not alone. The clinic's doors are open, and we believe you. Your story matters. Your pain is valid, and your fight for justice is worthwhile. They may have taken your freedom temporarily, but they can never take your truth. Hold on to it, nurture it, and when the time is right, let it destroy everything they built on their lies. The last time I saw Marcus was in a news report about prison overcrowding. He was just another face in an orange jumpsuit, unrecognizable as the surgeon who'd once commanded such respect. The reporter didn't even mention his name, just referred to him as another non-violent offender serving time for fraud. He'd become exactly what he'd tried to make me forgotten, irrelevant, and paying for crimes he actually committed. My life now is nothing like the one I'd planned when I married Marcus, but it's more authentic, more purposeful, more genuinely happy than anything I could have imagined. Thomas and I are expecting our first child conceived naturally after years of being told I was the problem. The clinic is expanding to a second location. Emma just got engaged to a wonderful man who understands our friendship and supports our mission. My parents visit monthly, proud of who their daughter has become. Sometimes I drive past the Beacon Hill brownstone where I once lived. New owners have painted it a different color, changed the gardens I'd carefully tended. It's just a house now, not a symbol of what was taken from me, but a reminder of what I survived. The woman who walked through that door as a naive bride believing in fairy tales is gone, replaced by someone who understands that real love doesn't destroy you, real justice takes time, and real strength comes from refusing to break when everyone expects you to shatter. This story isn't just mine. It belongs to every woman who's been framed, betrayed, wrongfully convicted, or destroyed by someone they trusted. We are legion, we are strong, and we are rising. Our voices silenced for too long by systems designed to protect the powerful are getting louder. Our stories dismissed as hysteria or revenge fantasies are being proven true. Our vindication delayed but not denied is changing the world one case at a time. Thank you for listening to my journey. If this story resonated with you, if you faced similar injustice or know someone who has, please share this message. Like this video if you believe in the power of truth over lies. Subscribe to hear more stories of survival and triumph over systematic injustice. Comment below with your own experiences, because your voice matters and your story deserves to be heard. Together we're rewriting the narrative of what it means to seek justice, to refuse victimhood, and to build something beautiful from the ruins of betrayal.